you're wearing every hat. You're the CEO, you're the CFO, your marketing, your sales, your license, your production. And it's hard. It's really, really hard to take off some of those hats. Pain and struggle and barriers is part of the journey. It's a giant part of the journey. It's a way bigger part of the journey than the overnight success, happiness. I think that the most important thing is entrepreneurs really do have a gut they just have an intuition. Yeah. And I think probably the biggest mistake is ignoring that.
You just heard the kind of conversation that will make you want to stop and take notes. Amanda, Sima, and I aren't talking about the vanity metrics of top-line revenue. Instead, we're unpacking the exact shifts in thinking you need to build a practice that is operationally healthy, built around your actual strengths, and positioned in a way that no competitor can simply copy. If you've ever felt the operational weight of trying to scale your expertise, this conversation is going to give you a completely new perspective on what sustainable growth really means. This is Unfiltered Solopreneur. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm your host, Nikhil. My next guest has built companies, invented products, survived the kind of business plot twist most founders only have nightmares about, and is now turning all of it into fuel for her next act. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate you.
Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about your journey and all the twists and turns in it. So I'm going to start sort of going back to graduation, right? Now, you graduated with a history degree. You said you had no idea what you wanted to do and fell into political fundraising. Then your grandmother handed you a vintage Ohio State sweater, and that became the spark for your first business. So take me back to that moment. What did you see that other people in the industry weren't seeing yet?
Yeah, for sure. So, during my time in political fundraising, I saw all sorts of business owners who had created companies from concepts. And I think that was really sort of the first time that I recognized entrepreneurism as like a career. And so after that, I was always kind of looking for, I think I want to start a business, but had no idea what it might be. And yeah, so I went to the Ohio State University, which is an enormous fan base and just absolutely its own culture. And yeah, my grandmother was a hoarder of Ohio State merchandise, and she gave me something really cool, and I wore it out one night, and I got a lot of compliments on it, and I'm kind of looking around like, everyone's in a t-shirt, everyone's in a sweatshirt. This would be really cool if I sold it, right? And so that was sort of the genesis of just behind the idea for the product. But once I really started researching the industry and if I'm going to turn this into a company, is it going to be worth it? And so in thinking, well, we all have our own Ohio State, or we all have our own team, we all have our own school. And I thought, I feel like my sales numbers could get pretty big pretty quickly, right? Because it's just such an enormous industry. And so in licensed apparel or merchandise, it's not just like I have a concept or an idea of something I want to sell. There's a whole compliance side of it. And that's important, though, because applying to these universities and for them essentially saying, yes, you can sell this product. Yes, you can sell this product because I think we're going to make money on your product, too, because we're paying them royalties. It was sort of the nail in the coffin in the best way of justifying this is a business, that I should pursue. The numbers get really high. The revenue could be really high. And it was just because of that compliance side, it's a high barrier of entry industry, right? It keeps a lot of, who wants to go up against Nike? Only this psycho, not many people want to take that on. And so, that's basically, that turned into my first company, over a number of years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'll come back and touch on that whole piece of the high barrier of entry, because you're right. It is tough to get into licensing now.
Mhm.
So I want to dig into that a little later in the podcast. But what's interesting to me is most people would have sort of walked away with the compliment, right? There was clearly something in you that said, wait a minute, there's something interesting going on here.
Yeah.
And is there
Yeah.
a market here? Could I build a business here? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I mean, because I looked around the room, I thought, "I'm the only one wearing this," which
Yeah.
means no one's doing it, right? And,
Yeah.
also a very sleepy industry. You know, Nike is a formidable competitor, but they're not doing I knew they wouldn't they're not doing sweaters, they have their business model, right?
Yeah.
And, I think that corporations, when they have their baked in business models, can get kinda lazy in innovation. And so that was definitely the state of the industry when I entered it.
Yeah.
Um, Everyone had their business models baked into t-shirts and sweatshirts, and that was it. And so that was sort of my foot in the door in the
Yeah.
industry.
And you're right though, because so many companies, like I manage the Kodak brand globally, and people are always like shocked when I tell them Kodak invented the digital camera and then put it in a
Mhm.
drawer, saying, what, this will take a long time, because the reality was, it's not that they didn't know, it's that nobody had the courage to kill the golden goose, right? So you're right.
Right.
There's sort of like when the machine, when the cash register is ringing, nobody wants to take a risk and say, let's try something different, because it
No.
might cannibalize on what you're already doing, and B
Hmm.
is it's a risk, right? So, but still, I think
Very
you
well
saw
said.
something. Vintage was not even like, and now it's really popular. Like kids are buying
Hmm.
vinyl records, making mixtapes,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
stuff that at least my generation grew up with. um
Yep,
and it's a big thing now in the category, but clearly you saw it early on, so
for sure.
kudos to you.
Yeah. Thank
So
you.
I want
Yeah.
I want to dig into alma mater a little bit now. You told me it grew quickly. Now, from the outside, it looked like runaway success, right? But at some point, the growth itself became dangerous. So the way you
Hmm.
about it to me was that, that during that period, you saw, or at least the lesson you learned was, there's a difference between a business that is growing and a business that is healthy. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's a difference between um, creative entrepreneurs, visionary entrepreneurs, and CEOs that run and grow businesses. And, the two aren't necessarily, oftentimes, they're not the same. And so I was always thinking, what's next? What's next? What's next? And I really wasn't growing the business in the present.
Right.
And I was sort of accelerating the business and positioning the business for sales that we couldn't even fund. We just weren't capitalized that way. Licensed apparel, once it does get very big very quickly, like I said, you amass a portfolio, you get maybe one or two really large customers who have multiple doors, then, then you're going to start to get seven-figure purchase orders, right? And that's exactly what I had aimed for. And um, you get to a point where you need massive amounts of capital. And we were still young enough as a company, growing, a fast growing startup, that really wouldn't qualify for like some of the largest bank loans that we really needed, right? So we did have some equity investors, and then we did take on some bank financing, and it just was not the right model for us. So we didn't have enough money. We
Yeah.
weren't we weren't like short on sales. That's when businesses go out of business because, well, we don't have any customers. We had customers. We had more sales than we could deliver. And I just think between the capital issues and logistically, the operations of the business got very, very complex. Um, the fast growing business that I had envisioned was, as you mentioned, kind of in dangerous territory. Because, you know, when you're growing fast, and let's say uh, because the operations or the logistics are getting so complex, you can miff an order, and then you've got a pissed off customer, and things can kind of snowball in a bad way, right? And so, um, I think probably my biggest regret, and then we've talked about this offline, is like not hiring a CEO to manage the growth that I was positioning the business for, because I just
Right.
couldn't turn off that vision, right? And um, my vision just wasn't aligned with just how the business was organized. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs have sort of that inability to be honest with themselves and what their strengths are, and passing over parts of your baby to someone else to help you grow it. Those were all things I didn't do. And so we were definitely healthy as a company, um, in our sales strategies and our sourcing and our production and our licensing and compliance. But just again, there were other aspects of the business that were just not organized, and that will always catch up to you. And so it did. Eventually it definitely led to my exit, because my partners and I thought, like, I'm just not fit for a CEO. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a founder, and I was okay with that. I was at peace with that because it had gotten to the point where I wasn't enjoying it anymore. It was just like keeping my head above water.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't think we talk about that aspect of it enough, right? We talk about, there's so much, people chase fast growth, but they don't actually talk about the pitfalls, or if you like, that come with it, right? And like you said, there's nothing wrong with the fact that you need, you can start. A lot of people love starting things, sort of setting it up,
Mhm.
but once it becomes a real day-to-day business, you need somebody with a different skill set to sort of start running and managing, like you said, just the fulfillment and all those kinds of things, which very often feel mundane to an entrepreneur, but are really good for somebody who's got that sort of background, who can, Google did that, Facebook did that. They sort of brought in people who could operationalize the business, right? Once it got
Yeah.
beyond the vision. So I think that's, yeah. And well, it seems like you recognize that, right? You just, and you made the exit in the end.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with any of my businesses moving forward, I won't have any interest in sort of being at the helm or the forefront as a CEO. That's just me. I
Yeah.
know Steve Jobs wasn't that way, but that's just I. I'm not disciplined enough in so many ways, to sort of see through my creative vision for the company, and as you mentioned, dig into the mundane details. Um, just not my strength.
Yeah, and recognizing that, I think, is the important thing, right? The
Oh yeah.
pitfall is a lot of founders. I feel like one of the mistakes they've made, at least the ones I've mentored a bunch, that they tend to either hire hire themselves, so they're not looking for the gaps they need to fill. Rather, they're just hiring images of themselves, which doesn't help the company, or they sort of fool themselves into believing at some point that, oh, I'll figure out how to do that, right? Even if their heart is not there, that's not what they're passionate about, and that's not what their strength is. So I think those things are great lessons.
It's tricky too, because if you're an entrepreneur, solopreneur, you have your own gig, and I think almost every entrepreneur should and does start on a shoestring budget, right? And
Yeah.
because you're on a budget, you're wearing every hat. You're the CEO, you're the CFO, your marketing, your sales, your production, and it's hard. It's really, really hard to take off some of those hats as you're
Uh-huh.
growing. It's just sort of that micromanage mentality, that I think a lot of entrepreneurs like need to get over if they really envision building a large company or corporation from their creation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's true for solopreneurs too, right? I always say bring in contractors. Like, don't at
Hmm.
some initially, you're right, you have to do everything. And you can
Hmm.
do everything reasonably well and a few things really well, right? But as you start
Right.
to grow, that becomes harder and harder to do. And plus, there are only so many hours in a day. And there's only so much
Right.
focus a brain can have, right? In terms of being able to generate high value output. So I think that, yeah, that's something you have to be careful about.
Yeah, and I also think entrepreneurs are literal wizards. We're really good at a lot of things, and sometimes that can lead us. into situations where, you know, we can achieve the impossible, but that still doesn't mean that there are some impossibilities, and that's when a CEO kind of steps in and says that not possible right now. Possible down there, maybe not possible right now. Like it's important to have sort of those two sets of brains running, a company.
Yeah, and also an outside perspective, right? That's the other thing I
Mhm.
always say. It's very important to have someone who can look from the outside in, right? Who has your
Yeah,
best interest at heart, but can see what we can't see because of proximity, right? And the other thing which
yeah.
I think is interesting is I love learning new things. And that's another
Mhm.
danger, right? Because you can become good at something if you spend enough time on it. But like, I'm like, I'd love to learn how to edit my podcast. And then I sat down and said, well, it's not going to help me grow my business. That's not a skill I need to learn. You know what I mean? It'll be fun
Exactly.
learning something new, but it's not valuable to my bottom line. So those decisions you have to start becoming more conscious of, I think, as you grow. So
For sure. Yeah. And I think that as we age in our entrepreneurial journey, we're learning these things. Certainly the like young Amanda Sima, same thing. Like I can do everything. I want to learn to do everything. And it's benefited me in so many ways, not even in my only in my business life, but in my personal life too. Just, that ability to learn things quickly and wear all those hats because I have a business to grow and I don't have money for contractors. That's like it adds, but as you yeah, I think as you kind of start your subsequent businesses, you learn very quickly what to do and what not to do.
and what to outsource,
What to
right? And
pass
also
off.
at what point to start outsourcing it, right?
I
Because
love
again,
deli
yeah,
yeah,
every hour you spend on something is an hour you can't spend on something probably more important. So yeah.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
moving forward now, you after exiting the apparel company, you invented a spill-proof disposable cup lid, right? Now
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
thought this is my unicorn, but then it all went pear-shaped. Now most people would have walked away. You didn't. You went back to school, or I would have, they would have gone and found a hole to hide in after you told me about your story.
Mhm.
But you went back to school for film, launched a production company, and
Mhm.
you started speaking publicly to help other
Mhm.
founders, right? So where does
Yeah.
that resilience come from?
Well, definitely, I say all the time with our businesses, that pain and struggle and barriers is part of the journey. It's a giant part of the journey. It's a way bigger part of the journey than the like overnight success, like happiness. So, um, if you were talking to like 20-year-old Amanda, it probably would have been the best advice. I'm trying to give it now to young entrepreneurs or even older entrepreneurs who are at the beginning of their journey, that these are things that you should happily anticipate, not dread, not try to avoid. There's no getting around the hills and valleys, right? Of starting and growing a business. And so I think I've taken that on as a mindset. Nothing in life is given to us, just as nothing in business is given to us in business. Just like life is just the Wild West, and like it can throw so many things at you. And it's designed that way. It's designed this way. It's designed for struggle. And so I think just in my mind, it's just part of my journey. Uh God bless to anyone who was able to get their product into market without the conflict like I'm experiencing. It definitely happens, but for the most part, it doesn't. For the most part, there's really bad corporate actors. There's really bad actors just in general out there, and I'm not going to be that person that gets walked all over. I think in my mind, when I look at giant corporations and companies, and many of which, to be honest, I've met the CEO, the founders of from fundraising in Ohio, and they all started this big, right? And so you're not going to, I mean, and they had maybe someone did try to halt their growth or not, but um, I think it's just about, um, me as an entrepreneur in any industry I'm going into. I'm trying to solve a problem or make something better, change something in that industry that needs to be changed. And so I think that part of me as an entrepreneur is kind of coming through in my legal battle, which is, small business and entrepreneurial advocacy. Um, because corporate piracy is a real thing. I say it all the time in this country. We have laws, we have antitrust laws that prevent these companies from getting so big that consumers are at their mercy. And that normally is like, oh, Apple can't merge with Google, big transactions. Well, there's small transactions behind the scenes that are growing these companies to the point where they're putting people out of business, and it's making the American dream of creating a corporation from a concept or creation in real peril, in real danger. I think it's probably harder than ever. I say it all the time. I designed my lid to solve a problem, but very quickly, and it was with my investor and my team, we thought we could turn this into a boutique thermoforming manufacturing facility in the United States, which we desperately need, right? Like
Yeah.
we outsource way too much. I could have, with my one creation, created a factory, American jobs, American manufacturing, but it was taken, right? And
Yeah.
so, um, when I'm talking about antitrust and this corporate greed and these companies getting so big on the backs of creators and most of them just going away because laws don't benefit them or the reality of litigation is just too daunting, like I'm not okay with that. So again, just I think as an entrepreneur, I'm always trying to fix something, and this is definitely a conversation that I want to create. We're too sophisticated a society to behave this way. And the reality is there's billion-dollar ideas in the air every day. We don't need to be conducting business this way, right? We should be embracing small businesses and creators. So, yeah, that's just, I mean, definitely, turning my negative into a positive is what I'm what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, well said. And I really appreciate that you're doing that, right? Because you're right. For every one voice like of yours, there are so many that just silently go away, right? And to
Absolutely.
me, there are two parts to this, right? There's also the legal way of sort of dissuade or getting rid of competition. You look at Facebook, they pretty much they've bought their way to innovation, right? They haven't really every company, WhatsApp, Instagram, they looked at things that could hurt their business and they bought them, right? So that's the other way to sort of quell competition. But a lot of these big companies too, you're right, they sort of quash the small guys, right? Because they'll copy a feature and they'll put a small twist on it. And that's the one thing that company was sort of banking on, and it was doing really well. So I agree. There's a lot of that happening, and I think there should be, more of a level playing field. And I think, it's important to sort of voice, the good and bad aspects of everything that we do within this capitalist society. It's not, I don't think it's one or the other. We have
Yeah,
to have
correct.
honest conversations about both. So I still think it's the best
There
place to start a business. Yeah.
Yeah, it is for sure. But there are definitely real world implications for that kind of conduct, Like
Yeah.
um I have I have a husband and a family who invested everything into this second business, right? And we were coming out of our first business, 12 years out of our first business, which was a struggle. And I you make an interesting point about Facebook. I mean, at least they're buying it. I mean, if you want something, you
Yeah.
buy it. Come to
Agreed.
me and buy it. Don't you just don't take it,
Don't steal it. Yeah.
Especially um, with minority entrepreneurs who already have an uphill battle. There's just, I don't come from generational wealth. I'll tell you why I don't come from generational wealth, because my I had a grandmother, I had grandparents on my mom's side who were very entrepreneurial. They um, opened the first Mexican restaurant in Columbus, Ohio. Very first. It was such a cool story. But my whole life, I was told that we were like part Native American, and I did a DNA test, and we weren't. I'm actually, that entire side of my family is biracial, African American and white, but they had to lie because back then they couldn't start a business. You couldn't start a business if you were black, right? You couldn't
Right.
own
Yeah.
land if you were black. It was the civil rights era. So, um, I don't come from generational wealth because my grandparents weren't able to, right? And so the playing field is definitely different. I think for
Yeah.
women and for minorities, just having been in it, it's not a political talking point. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I think that um again, corporations should be rewarding that because again, they all started small and no one stopped them in their tracks. So yeah, it's corporate piracy is something I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, and I agree. There's no, I mean, there's a clear distinction between stealing and,
Mhm.
buying your way out of trouble or buying your way into innovation. Both, have different places, but you're right. I mean, there's no, and I think what they do is they rely on the heft of the corporate machinery to quash the small business, right? When there's a bad actor, they're like, we've got this battery of lawyers, they're not going to fight back, or we'll run them dry, right? While they try and battle us to the point where they give up. So that I think is completely wrong, and that's why I'm glad you've got a megaphone and talking about that, because I'm sure a lot more of that goes on than we know about. Because for every one
Yeah,
voice, there are probably 10 silent voices, right? Or people who
for sure.
silently, yeah, who give up.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
so I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about brand building and marketing. Now, you've built a licensed apparel company, invented a patented product, launched a production company, and
Mhm.
now people are coming to you for advice. So, when someone
Mhm.
asks you, what do you do? Is that an easy question for you to answer, or is it a surprisingly hard one?
Oh, I say I have a disease. It's called serial entrepreneurism that I suffer from. I'm sure you suffer from the same disorder. Um, I just say, I don't know, I'm a small business owner. If they open the can of worms about, oh, how'd you get started in that? They're like, kind of jaw dro in fact, and I think sometimes I gravitate outside my body and I'm like, "Did I really do all of that?" Because when you have a product or you have a service and you're starting a business, you're so passionate about it. You're in the middle of a tornado. You don't even see what's around you, until you're on the other side. Um, but yeah, so I definitely think I'm hoping that this last business is sort of my legacy business. I started my first business when I was like 26, um, and always wanted to grow it and sell it. And I thought I'll go into something else. When I went into plastics, before we were essentially put out of business, I was starting to think about, maybe I want to start a factory. I want to start a business that maybe I can pass down to my kids, right? And with my production company, definitely something I'm passionate about. You mentioned my completely worthless history degree. Sorry, Ohio State. I love you. You're my alma mater, but completely worthless degree. Uh, I considered, and I didn't. Majoring in film and television. I've always been really interested in it, but never really thought about how I might make a career of it. And so now I've started a production company, and it's kind of full circle because a lot of what I'm writing is based on my experiences as a female entrepreneur, as a female in business, as an underdog. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that's going to be, well, I'm hoping it's the first business ever that I've had where I haven't experienced corporate piracy because with both of my first two businesses, I had a corporation try or did, attempt to take something that I created. So, but yeah, hoping to just maybe grow something that I can just settle in and run and be happy. And it's been a long time since I've done that.
Yeah, but I mean, to be fair, you went back to school to do that, right? You went
Mhm.
back to school to do film
Yeah.
production, and also I wouldn't beat yourself up over the history degree. I think that if the world learned a little more history, we'd be in a much better place today if we paid
Amen to
attention to it.
that.
Yeah.
Amen to that. Definitely, as I was studying history, I'm like, why aren't we learning from our mistakes? This is so silly. Yeah, for sure. Ironically, majored in history because I thought I wanted to go to law school, and being entangled in a giant lawsuit, there are obviously massive negative feelings, but also I have to say I'm kind of compelled because the law does really fascinate me. So I think that's the silver lining. But as any any entrepreneur, anything that you're doing or thinking of starting, you have to educate yourself. And I thought, well, I want to be a writer and a director, but no one just wakes up and is a writer and a director. I mean,
Mhm.
so I thought, I'm going to go back to school, and we've got a really good film school here in the Denver area. And yes, oftentimes I'm the oldest person in my class, but it bothers me none. Doing my homework and learning what I need to learn, so I can, yeah, start producing sort of my own creations.
You're the wisest person in the class, Amanda.
oh, I definitely give advice. I'm like everyone's mom for sure. Yeah.
So people are already coming to you with questions, right? And
Mhm.
you haven't even built a website or launched a formal advisory business. So I'm curious, what
No.
do you think they're sensing in you that is making them people reach out?
Well, I've failed more than I've succeeded. And I think failure really failure is learning. So I've learned a lot. Um, and I going back to just that, wearing so many hats when you're starting out a business. I have the beauty of technology at my fingertips much more now than I did, when I was 25, 26, starting out my first business. But I think having worn all those hats, I just, um, I said earlier that entrepreneurs are we're so talented in so many ways. Um, we can compartmentalize and organize and unpack, chaotic or disorganized situations, right? More so than I think like the typical layman, right?
Okay.
Um, and we're kind of forced to do that. We're forced to have that discipline with our businesses. And so I just think that lends itself obviously to business, but also to like your personal life as well. And so I think yeah, so I started my platform Brain on Loan not as a business. It's not actually a business I'm seeking to kind of grow. It's just a community that I would like to expand so that business owners who are starting out or maybe are thinking about starting a business, don't know where to start, that they don't have to feel like they have to shell out a bunch of money in consulting. When really it's just one or two questions or me just walking someone through any given circumstance. I'll give you an example. When Alma Mater started really growing very, very big to the point where I wanted to exit, my partners wanted to exit, we shopped it around a lot to sell. And so I went through that entire process from top to bottom and with multiple people or businesses interested in purchasing it. And so I had a friend contact me who has a small business that's kind of steadily grown, but getting logistically too much for her. And I announced I was doing Brain on Loan, and I get this text like, I want to sell my business. I don't know where to start. I have no idea what to do. And it's just a matter of like three or four really important steps, things that she needed to do right away to start attracting buyers or start pitching it to buyers. And so things like that I've just been through that
Hmm.
I could just really walk her through like in my sleep. It's not hard
Yeah.
for me. So yeah, and I've already had people, it's just sad. It's kind of sad. I have people that come to me with the same patent and like legal obstacles. And but you know what? On the opposite end, like my last podcast I had on the president of US Inventor, which is an organization based out of DC that lobbies for patent reform, which is something I am not well versed in, but I know a lot of us creators are interested in how does that protect us or how can we fix the system that so that benefits like smaller creators and patent owners. And so it's bringing people into my universe who are just giving free advice. So that's just, I hate to say it's like an advice, it's just so cliche, like an advice platform, but it really is. It's just guidance and advice from entrepreneurs or, anyone in any who has excelled in any given industry, who has experienced failure, experienced success, and can help anyone kind of feeling like they have nowhere to turn. I think it would surprise us how many entrepreneurs and business owners really don't have mentors.
I think you're being modest. I think that there are two things that strike me about this. One is that the way you sort of wear the journey, the ups and downs,
Mhm.
especially the scars. I think few people do it with the level of integrity and honesty that you do, right? Because there are not many people. Most people will go and, like the social media highlight reels, always talk about the successes. They'll sort of
Yeah.
gloss over the dips, but nobody spends time talking about, here in my low point, this was sort of what I went through, right? And not even get to, and to me, the only failure in life, I think, is when you walk away without learning anything.
Mhm.
Everything else is learning, right? It's not failure.
Mhm.
And I don't
Mhm.
think we talk about that enough. So I think that's one, credit to you. And the second thing I think is that what you've learned, you can't learn in a classroom, right? You've actually,
No.
the scars are from the battlefield. And I think there's
Right.
real value in that, because you've been in the room, you've been in those pressure situations. And it's very different from something you could learn from a textbook, in terms of, the experiences is what shape us ultimately, right? We can read as much as we want. We can be lectured as much as we want. We could watch as many YouTube videos, but that the lived experience is always going to be different. So, it's like I'm a golf addict, and it's like you have to play the course to understand the terrain, no matter how
Mhm.
well briefed you are by anybody. You Until you've played it and you see how the greens sort of slope and the speed, you're not going to know how to navigate it, right? So I think that's the difference.
Yeah. You gotta have a feel for any given scenario. I'll never forget, when we started with the lids, and I had an investor who, made his business in, like, distribution, which is a highly sort of logistically complex business, but once you have the model baked in, then you have a really well-run, company. And I just remember early on, in the business coming across just like a couple, like in my mind, like, I don't know how this is going to work, or what happens when this happen. How do we, and like he would have an answer just right off. And that's a real mentor, that and it's a business owner who's just been through it. It's, he's had experiences that lend to his thinking, right? And I thought, in that moment, I was like, I am so happy I'm in business. Like, I'm gonna keep going and keep just with the trial and error, because if one day I wanna be like that. I want someone to come to me and say, "Hey, I have this business. Logistically, I can't figure out this part of it," and it just rolls off the tongue because I've experienced it, you know? It's like it's the greatest, to me, I thinking back in some of the really troubling and, scary times with both of our businesses, um I'm so proud of the pain I endured. Like, there's no other way, you know what I mean? Like, you live through it. You live
Yeah.
to tell the story, and yeah, I'm super proud of it.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree with you. I always say, I look back, and the hardest times in my life are the ones I cherish the most. Because
Yep.
because what you've learned,
Yep.
the way your perspective was shaped, and also understanding that you got through it. You're still here,
Yep.
you're still standing, and that means you have something inside you that you can lean on, right? When things get really hard. So I think there's much more value in learning from people who've been to the school of hard knocks than people who had,
Mhm.
quick success. And there's nothing
For
wrong with
for
that.
sure.
Happy for them,
And
but
yeah,
it
isn't it
doesn't.
just like science or physics? Like, you kinda keep going until you hit it, you know what I mean? Don't use that advice for gambling. Don't use that advice for gambling. But you kinda keep going until, like, it's your first venture is not gonna be a massive success, and those stories are, you could count on your 2 hands how common that is, right? So, again, going back to, I'm gonna do an episode on pain, um, uh, on my podcast, and it's not gonna be a negative episode, it's gonna be, let's embrace it. Pain is a happy thing because you grow from it, right?
Yeah.
When you're in it, be grateful that you're in it, because there's always another side, and it's a better side, right, from that experience. And I'm saying that because I've lived through it. This isn't me just, you know, orating. Like, I've lived it. Just trust me, you know?
Yeah, and you're here talking about it, which is
Hmm.
great. So yeah,
Yeah.
and the sun will come up tomorrow, right? I mean, no matter how bad, how mad dark it gets. So, the other thing I want to talk about is the next chapter in a sense, right? So right now, your entry point into the public conversation is this high stakes sensational lawsuit, which has got a lot of press coverage. It's a powerful hook, but litigation eventually wraps up, right? So when
Mhm.
the dust settles and the battle is officially over, so to speak, what do you want people to understand about you underneath that story?
Well, definitely that what anything you create, business, life, if you're a mother or father, a pet owner, I don't care. Anything you create is worth fighting for. And we've said it a million times. It's not going to come easy, but it's worth fighting for. Um, I think that in my journey, which has been, yes, it's been very sensational to the point of unbelievable. And there are days where you're like, do I just want to move on with my life? Um, I have to remind myself that I can't, that's something that I've created that's come from me, that's come from like a God given talent that I have is worth fighting for. And, if you're a parent and you're struggling with one of your kids, like that kid is worth fighting for. That relationship's worth fighting for. That job, that promote, whatever in life is worth fighting for. So I think that, of course, I want, um, I want to prevail in the litigation and be sort of a hero to small business owners everywhere who've experienced the same thing. Um, I'm, but I'm just not in a personal or a selfish way. I want this to create a conversation so that others are protected.
Yeah, and others also sort of find the courage to speak up, right? And the will to fight, so to speak. So I think that's really important because honestly, I always say, these kinds of things exist because not enough people fight back, right? And they count on people not fighting back, not through any fault of
Right.
theirs, because they sort of throw the corporate juggernaut at you and they try to
Mhm.
quash you, right? That's their whole goal. So, um,
Yeah.
I want to go back and touch on that point you mentioned earlier about the NCAA licenses, right? Now, to
Mhm.
scale alma mater, you had to secure, I think it was like over 150 highly competitive licenses. And you
Mhm.
didn't have a big agency behind you, or
Nope.
so you had to get into each of these rooms through relationships, persistence, or credibility you built yourself. So, could you talk a little bit about what was your actual playbook for getting into those rooms and convincing them to bet on you?
I knew that I wanted to get the Ohio State license for obvious and multiple reasons. One, my hometown, my school, my alma mater. I was really, and just seeing what my grandmother had in her basement. And I thought, I want to add to that collection. So that was number one. But number two, I mean, it's arguably one of the largest fan bases in the country and a very, very difficult license to get. And I knew that if I got that license, that I would have credibility in this space with other schools, with other licensing agencies. So it was of paramount importance that I get that license. To get the Ohio State license, I couldn't just flash a smile. I'm an alumna and here's my cute sweater. Like I knew I was going to have to go in with at least more weapons than that. And so I actually thought, well, what if I go to like a few smaller schools so that Ohio State doesn't feel like they're taking they're the very first ones that are going to take a risk on me. So I went to a couple smaller schools who had a more straightforward licensing process, meaning it was just person to person. I wasn't going through an intermediary. I wasn't going through an agency that represented the university. I was sending them an email. I was shipping literally samples to their licensing director in house. And so I got a couple smaller, I say smaller licenses, but they're still giant fan bases. My first license was University of Iowa. They had a
Wow.
pretty straightforward licensing process. And then my next was Michigan State. And they all love the products. Customers love the products. So I sort of started small and then took that to the larger licensees and said, I have something that works and don't just take my word for it. Here's my results.
Yeah.
And so I think that paired with the novelty of the product and the integrity of the product because we had pretty nice knits. I mean, they were, I don't know what's in market now. I don't follow it as closely, but I mean, we were some of the highest quality, probably the highest quality knits in market. And so that, so having kind of a handful of licenses under my belt, little bit of sales, went to them and said, "Look, I have something really novel." Um, Made it easy for me to at least sort of get my foot in the door. Now, I did unfortunately experience some corporate piracy during that process, but it never became legal. Um, it did lead to me to getting the Ohio State license. Um, and from there, after Ohio State, I hired like a specialist. He was just a full-time employee and he did a phenomenal job helping me build out the portfolio. Very, very relationship based. Yeah. I mean, you got
Yeah.
to talk to every licensing director and convince. So I did get to a point where I had to hire someone, but no, I didn't have a giant agency or anything behind me. I just had, um, little old me and my products that I was proud of.
Yeah, and that's a really smart strategy, right? Because I think most people tend to boil the ocean or they try to go for the big one. And you're right. What you did was you sort of looked at the risk appetite because you're right. The big companies hate taking risks. We talked about that up
Hmm.
front too. They're sort of very risk averse as much as people think they're innovative because once they have something that's working, then they don't want to touch it. But
Right.
it was really smart because you still kept your eye on sort of the prize and realized that once that domino fell, the others would be a lot easier, right? Because then you go to the next one, they're like, oh, if Ohio State trusts her, then obviously she's got a good track record. So I think that's really smart because, and that's a mistake I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs make is sort of go for the big prize straight away, right? Straight out the gate. And then they
Yeah.
get frustrated or they hit their head against a wall. And because people are not willing to take a chance on somebody, especially one person, right? I mean, I've had the same thing with companies that I've started where it's like, wait a minute, they have this huge corporation and they're like, you're three guys and you're going to be able to deliver
Hmm.
this? Like, what happens if you three get hit by a bus? Like,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. And a lot of buyers, in consumer goods, like they've all been burned one way or another. Like they've like, you know, took the hook, took the line, and they're like, "Oh, I love the product." And then what? The vendor can't fulfill orders or something. And then they have egg on their face, with their boss or at their company. And so buyers are very tough, skeptical sort of people to sell. And so I think you just go if you can for the lowest hanging fruit. And that's what I tell people, mate, like just find those local sales as much as possible. Because if you're going to a buyer and you're showing that I have a customer for my product and I've been able to deliver on that product, then you can boil the ocean. Okay.
yeah,
But you gotta start small.
right. Lay the first few bricks, right, before you try and
That's
build a
right.
house. Yeah.
Right.
So now you talked about something that was really important in my mind that that some business owners aren't honest with themselves about when it's time to pivot or shut everything
Hmm.
down, right?
Hmm.
So what's the question a solopreneur should be brave enough to ask themselves when they're trying to figure out, is this just a hard period I need to push through, or is it a version of the business that's done?
Right. Well, so all businesses are different, all scenarios are different. I definitely think it just goes without saying if you have any kind of business that's affecting your health, that's affecting your physical health or your mental health, that because you can't keep up or you can't catch that sale, it's not worth it. I think that you know, as I mentioned a million times, like you're gonna experience struggles and barriers into market. I think if you have a steady number of years where sales are an issue, I think you have a product that's an issue. Um, I think if you have if you have, let's say you have a product where maybe sales aren't the issue, but profitability is an issue, and this is an ongoing trend, you know, y- you have to, um, you have to start to be honest with yourself in, I think, exploring whether it's time to shut something down and start something else. I just had another guy on my podcast. His name's Marty Fonke, and he helps small businesses um, sell. Or he's got buyers out there looking to buy businesses, so he's a broker. and sort of, not private equity level, but lower than that. And he's got a lot of people that come to him and, they're like, I want to sell my business. And he kind of goes through everything and he's like, you don't really have anything to sell here. It's not worth anything. Right. So I think it's important to have people like that in your network, wherever you can find them that can give you honest feedback on your business or the state of your business. But like I said, every business is different. And so
Yeah.
you're not going to create a new way to slice bread and get rich overnight. It's going to be a slog, you know? And you will get to a point where you're like, well, okay, I can scale it. Um, and I think that the most important thing is entrepreneurs really do have a gut for they just have an intuition.
Yeah.
And I think probably the biggest mistake is ignoring that. And I would say in my experience as an entrepreneur, I've learned to trust my gut a little more. If, I'm in a meeting with someone I can't quite trust, or this investor doesn't seem right for me, like I just walk away. And I think that, just beyond everything else I detailed and really digging into your business and figuring out where you're struggling, I think you really have to kind of say, like, just say to yourself, what's my gut telling me,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you touched on that because I'm a firm believer in trusting your gut, right? I always say
Mhm.
the only times in life I've gone horribly wrong is when I haven't trusted my gut.
Same.
Because
Absolute
right? I
same.
mean, I think it's important to look at the numbers, look at the spreadsheet. There's a rational side to it. It's not either or, but
Right.
inside what you know, right? Because I mean, I
Right.
always say the best playbook is the one you built for yourself, because nobody knows you better than what shaped you and the things you can sort of sense. So I think
Yeah.
it's just being honest, but also having those outside people, like you said, who can also sort of throw a little
Mhm.
bit of light to, even if it's just to validate what you're seeing or to help you see it slightly differently, right? So because
Yeah. I mean, listen, you can hit up my platform anytime, brainonloan.com, and submit me a question and I'll give you honest feedback. Um, and I think there should be more of us like when my friend came to me and told me what was going on with her business, we talked through it and I led her to you have to sell this. I don't see this growing in a way that's, worth you continuing to invest your time. You've positioned it for someone else to grow, right? And go start something else. You're really good. What are you really good at? You're really good at creating. Okay? And are you good at scaling? No. Then give it to someone else and that's your superpower, right? So
yeah,
again, it just really comes down to like knowing yourself really well.
and trusting yourself, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
knowing that what you know. Um,
For sure.
so and sort of drowning out the noise because there's a lot of noise too. So take
Very much.
somebody another great guest once told me that you know take the meat and throw away the bones when it comes to advice, and I love
Mhm.
that.
Love
So
that.
now we mentioned earlier, right, that there, for every one person who fights like you, there are thousands who just sort of go away. Now,
Mhm.
I'm sure there are a lot of creators out there who are terrified the idea will be stolen. So how do you encourage people to protect themselves without scaring them out of sort of taking the leap or creating or jumping in?
Definitely if you have any kind of creation that can be protected, find a way to protect it. My design patent was pretty largely useless. I could have really used a utility patent. For any listeners who don't know the difference, a utility patent just protects like how your product or your technology functions. And so it's not bulletproof because you're still going to have maybe corporate competitors out there who are willing to spend the money on pirating it and just see if you come after them. But definitely like those NDAs, um, in China, they're called NNN agreements with your factory. And patent protection, copyright, trademark, all of that is really important. It's not bulletproof, but it's really important. And then I also say, you really have to be mindful, beyond that, of who you sort of let in your inner circle in the early stages of your business. Um, you are going to get to a point where you're going to have to expose your product somehow. And that's I mean, that's where I experienced my corporate piracy, unfortunately. It doesn't happen to everyone, but really be mindful of who you're letting in the early. If you contract an engineer to help with your technology or your product or your tooling, like maybe use someone as local as you possibly can. So that you're part of the same community. You feel like you can trust each other. Um, and then I'd say just like beyond that, the only protection you really can put into place is once your product is exposed and it's in market, look for any kind of marketing angle that a corporation can't like my cop my we had the we used the catchphrase invented by a mom. A corporation can't steal that sort of brand equity.
Yeah.
So brand equity, branding, and a following is your greatest protection, and it doesn't come without exposure. But it's like those sales and that consumer following, that customer following, that makes it harder for them to justify taking your product.
True. Yeah. And like you said, there are always risks with everything you do, right? Crossing the street
Right.
is a risk.
Mhm.
Yeah, but you can't mitigate all of it. But I think, like you
Right.
said, you can be smart and even have people in your circle sort of help you vet before you make a
Mhm.
big deal, right? Are
For
smart
sure.
things to do, right? Because
Yeah,
yeah, a second set of eyes always helpful. Um,
for
okay,
sure.
so if you had to give one piece of advice to somebody wanting to start their solopreneur journey, what would you tell them?
Do it.
Yeah.
Do it. I mean, really, um, I have 0 regrets. If I could have 12 businesses right now, I'd be thrilled. D Do not question yourself and do it. It's a fascinating journey. It's so empowering. It's an empowering journey. You'll grow so much as a person. Like, be excited to fail, stop questioning yourself, and do it. Seriously, that's my advice.
All I have to say is move over Nike. I think you put that into words better than they do
Just
these
do
days.
it. I didn't even sorry, Nike.
All right, that
Just
brings us to a rapid fire round. So we're just looking for like one word or one sentence answers.
okay.
So, what is the worst piece of business advice you see circulating on social media right now?
Oh, man. The don't pay anyone to help you go viral on TikTok. Don't. You need like, those aren't real.
Hallelujah. Uh,
Mhm.
complete this sentence. You know you are truly cut out for the solopreneur journey when you finally learn to love.
Risk.
Yeah, that's great. Which is harder, starting, scaling, or walking away?
Mm, definitely scaling because I think that, regardless of what your business is, logistically, it gets complex.
True. So you need different skill sets, right, to bring in at that point.
For sure.
Now, you're a self proclaimed history buff. We talked about that. If you could have any historical figure as a silent co founder for your production company, who are you picking?
Oh, definitely. That's a hard one. Probably John Adams. I
Oh,
don't know.
nice.
I just think he was such a smart person. Yeah, John Adams.
That's great. And I think he was Sam Adams' brother, right? So they can bring the beer too.
Let's do it. Like, yeah, for sure.
All right. If you could put one sentence on a billboard outside every law school in America, what does it say?
Outside every law school,
Yeah.
if you're in law school right now, you better be miles better than ChatGPT.
Yeah.
The biggest threat to the legal profession right now is AI.
Very true. Very true.
Be
And the
better,
human being.
be better than ChatGPT.
Yes, I agree because yeah, we're in a lot of trouble if they're not. So great way to
Yes.
end the show, Amanda. Thank you so much for being so honest about your
Yeah.
journey, all the ups and all the downs. It's been really a joy talking to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Our conversation goes in a lot of different directions, but there's a through line running underneath all of it that I want to pull out for you because I think it applies directly to where a lot of you are right now. The first takeaway: there's a dangerous difference between a business that is growing fast and a business that is growing healthy. Amanda said something early in the conversation that I think gets glossed over in many founder communities. She said the business wasn't short on sales, they had more sales than they could deliver. And yet, that is exactly what led to the unraveling. Most of the content you see online treats revenue growth as the finish line. Close more deals, sign more high ticket clients, launch more programs, scale, scale, scale faster. But Amanda's story is really a clear illustration of what happens when the business engine grows faster than the founder passion and the infrastructure behind it. For those of you building a solo practice or a service business, here's the version of it that applies to you. If you're constantly adding new offers, chasing new audiences, or pivoting your positioning before the last thing has had time to gain traction, you might be doing what Amanda did. You're speeding toward a version of your business your current foundation can't support, and eventually your energy, your passion, and client experience starts paying the price. So the question worth sitting with is, if my client base doubled tomorrow, would my business be a dream to run, or would it become an absolute nightmare that breaks my health and my brand reputation? Second takeaway: knowing what you should no longer be carrying is not weakness. Refusing to admit it is. Amanda is completely at peace with the fact that she's a founder, not a CEO. She said it clearly. She's not disciplined enough to see through the day to day, mundane, but critical operational side of growing a business. And far from being a confession of failure, recognizing that distinction is one of the most strategic things she said in this conversation. As a solopreneur, you probably don't have the luxury of hiring a CEO, but you have contractors, you have collaborators and partners, and people you bring in for specific pieces of work. So the real question is, are you bringing them in to offload the operations that drain your energy? Or are you still holding on to the mundane details just because you can do them? Because being capable of doing a task doesn't mean it's a valuable use of your time. One of those moves protects your zone of genius, the other keeps you trapped in the weeds. The third takeaway: big doors open faster when you reduce the risk of saying yes. The way Amanda got into the licensing world is one of the most practically useful things in this entire episode. And I don't want it to get lost in the bigger story. She wanted Ohio State. That was the prize. But she knew that walking into Ohio State cold as an unknown small solo vendor with no track record was a losing play. So she went to smaller schools first, universities with more accessible licensing processes. She shipped samples directly to licensing directors. She spent time building a track record, getting results, and only then did she walk into the bigger rooms with proof instead of promises. Now, that is a credibility building insight, not just a sales tip. And I see the opposite of this constantly. Solopreneurs who go after the biggest fish first, the most prestigious platform or the highest profile partnership before they have anything to show. And then they're confused and dejected about why no one is taking them seriously or even agreeing to meet with them. The answer is almost always the same. You haven't given a highly discerning, risk averse buyer an easy way to taste your expertise first. Make it easy for someone to say yes. Stack a few of those yeses, then use them to open the biggest doors. And the final takeaway is this: brand equity is not marketing fluff, it is protection. This one caught my attention because it's something I talk about with clients, and Amanda arrived at it from a completely different angle, through litigation, through corporate piracy, through the hard way. She said something very specific toward the end of the conversation. She said the only protection you can put in place once your product is out in the world is to find a marketing angle that no corporation can take from you. She used the example of their tagline, invented by a mom. And the point she was making is that brand equity, a following, a story that is genuinely and specifically yours, is harder to replicate than a product feature. A corporation can copy the product. They cannot copy the story the market associates with you. For coaches and solopreneurs, this is especially important because you probably don't have a patent. And anyone can copy your methodology, borrow your framework, or even lift your brand language if it's generic enough. The one unique asset you do have is your lived experience, your worldview, and the specific way you diagnose and solve a problem because what those experiences have taught you. And that is the one thing no competitor can simply copy, not because it's legally protected, but because it's genuinely yours. That's why positioning your story specifically and deliberately is not a nice to have. It's the one investment a competitor cannot undercut. Here's my challenge to you this week. Apply Amanda's proof audit. Pick one specific opportunity you want more of in your business. It could be bigger clients, a bigger opportunity, a speaking engagement, a partnership, a referral. Now ask yourself, what proof would make it easier for the right buyer to say yes? Not what would impress them, not what would make you look smart, what would reduce their risk? Then write down 3 pieces of proof you already have, even if they feel small: a client result, a testimonial, a repeat pattern from your work, a smaller room that already says yes. And once you have those 3, look at your LinkedIn profile, your website, your podcast bio, or your sales page, or the way you introduce your work. Is that proof visible? Because proof that only lives in your head is not helping the market build trust in you. Thanks for listening to Unfiltered Solopreneur. If you're already good at what you do, but your brand still isn't making that value obvious to the right people, that's usually not a capability problem. It's a positioning problem. That's what we look at in a 45-minute brand clarity session, where the friction is, why it's costing you right fit opportunities, and what needs to become clearer. If that's resonating, the link to book is in the show notes. And if you're not sure yet, that's fine too. Come back when you are. And remember, your story is your most powerful asset. Live solo or die corporate.